Hey, welcome back. We're going to actually dive into Call of the Wild today, get to know Buck as we look at the exposition of this story. What is exposition again? Oh, it's the beginning of the story where we learn about characters and setting. Okay, so we're at the exposition of the story. We're going to be learning a little bit more about Buck and what the story is really about. So, yesterday, or at least in the last lesson, we discussed ideas related to our unit, essential questions, and we analyzed the epigraph of the Call of the Wild. That epigraph is that little piece at the beginning of the chapter that kind of sets the tone for the book. So today, what we're going to do, we're going to read and discuss the beginning of chapter 1, the Call of the Wild. We're going to examine how Buck's experiences and his interactions with different individuals change him. Okay, so we're going to see him changing a little bit. And this is part of the rising action where we start to see a character in the exposition start to change a little bit. We go, there's something happening with this character. Finally, we're going to use evidence from the text that strongly supports our analysis. Okay, so it's fine to have an opinion. As long as your opinion is backed up by evidence from the text, you're good to go. Today, what you're going to need is your copy of Call of the Wild by Jack London. Make sure it has your number on it that is checked out to you. Again, take a look at your book. If there's any damage to it, let me know right away. Raise your hand, and we can get that taken care of. You will also need the split page notes for Chapter 1, and those can be found in your blue notebook on page 14. Okay, so your blue notebook, page 14. Again, if 14 is covered up because of the folding of the pages, that's fine. Just look for 15 and it's on the left. Finally, you'll need your vocabulary chart at the very beginning of your blue folder to keep track of those vocabulary words you're not familiar with. Excellent. So you have your copy of Call of the Wild. We're going to start on page 1 and read pages 1, 2, and 3. All of page 1, all of page 2, all of page 3. If you want to read this on your own, you can skip this slide, or you can pause it right now, read by yourself, and come back when you finish page 3. Okay? Now, if you'd like to read along with me, I will read this out loud. Please follow along with your eyes. This is very important. It helps you gain a better understanding and actually improves your reading as you look at the words while I read. Okay? This isn't time to just press play, listen to me read while you do whatever, play around or anything like that. Your eyes need to be on the text as I read, okay? So I'm going to start us off. Call of the Wild, page 1, chapter 1, Into the Primitive. Old longings nomadic leap, chafing at custom's chain, again from its brumal sleep wakens the faring strain. Buck did not read the newspapers, or he would have known that trouble was brewing. Not alone for himself, but for every tidewater dog, strong of muscle and with warm, long hair, from Puget Sound to San Diego. Because men, groping in the Arctic darkness, had found a yellow metal. And because steamship and transportation companies were booming the find, thousands of men were rushing into the Northland. These men wanted dogs, and the dogs they wanted were heavy dogs with strong muscles by which to toil, and furry coats to protect them from the frost. Buck lived at a big house in the sun-kissed Santa Clara Valley. Judge Miller's place, it was called. It stood back from the road, half hidden among the trees, through which glimpses could be caught of the wide, cool veranda that ran around its four sides. The house was approached by graveled driveways, which wound about through wide-spreading lawns and under the interlacing boughs of tall poplars. At the rear, things were on even a more spacious scale than at the front. There were great stables, where a dozen grooms and boys held forth rows of vine-clad servants' cottages. An endless an orderly array of outhouses, long grape arbors, green pastures, orchards, and berry patches. Then there was the pumping plant for the artesian well, and the big cement tank where Judge Miller's boys took their morning plunge and kept cool in the hot afternoon. And over this great demesne, Buck ruled. Here he was born. And here he had lived the 4 years of his life. It was true, there were other dogs. There could not but be other dogs on so vast a place, but they did not count. They came and went, resided in the populous kennels, or lived obscurely in the recesses of the house after the fashion of Toots, the Japanese pug, or Isbel, the Mexican hairless. Strange creatures that rarely put nose out of the doors or set foot to ground. On the other hand, there were the fox terriers, a score of them at least, who yelped fearful promises at Toots and Isbel, looking out of the windows at them, and protected by a legion of housemaids armed with brooms and mops. But Buck was neither house dog nor kennel dog. The whole realm was his. He plunged into the swimming tank, or went hunting with the judge's sons. He escorted Molly and Alice, the judge's daughters, on long twilight or early morning rambles. On wintry nights he lay at the judge's feet before the roaring library fire. He carried the judge's grandsons on his back, or rolled them in the grasses, and guarded their footsteps through wild adventures down to the fountain in the stable yard, and even beyond, where the paddocks were, and the berry patches. Among the terriers he stalked imperiously, and Toots and Isbel he utterly ignored, for he was king over all creeping, crawling, flying things of Judge Miller's place, humans included. His father Elmo, a huge St. Bernard, had been the judge's inseparable companion, and Buck bid fair to follow in the way of his father. He was not so large. He weighed only 140 pounds, for his mother, Shep, had been a Scotch shepherd dog. Nevertheless, 140 pounds, to which was added the dignity that comes of good living and universal respect, enabled him to carry himself in a right royal fashion. During the 4 years since his puppyhood, he had lived the life of a sated aristocrat. He had a fine pride in himself, was ever a trifle egotistical, as country gentlemen sometimes become because of their insular situation. But he had saved himself by not becoming a mere pampered house dog. Hunting and kindred outdoor delights had kept down the fat and hardened his muscles. And to him, as to the cold tubbing races, the love of water had been a tonic and a health preserver. And this was the manner of dog Buck was in the fall of 1897, when the Klondike strike dragged men from all the world into the frozen north. But Buck did not read the newspapers. He did not know that Manuel, one of the gardener's helpers, was an undesirable acquaintance. Manuel had one besetting sin. He loved to play Chinese lottery. Also, in his gambling, he had one besetting weakness, faith in the system. And this made his damnation certain. For to play a system requires money, while the wages of a gardener's helper do not lap over the needs of a wife and numerous progeny. Okay, you have just finished reading or listening to pages 1, 2, and 3, and now we're going to answer some questions. So if you'll actually turn in your blue folder to page 14, blue folder, page 14, you'll see the split page notes, The Call of the Wild, Chapter 1, Intro the Primitive. We're going to answer questions 1 and 2. You can see this chart up here on the left of the slide. It's highlighted in yellow, the questions you'll answer. It's important to answer by citing evidence from the text. So you'll have the text in front of you as well. Let's look at number 1. What does the reader learn in the first sentence about the problem, the main character, and the setting? I'm going to read the first sentence again, and I want you to think about, what do we learn about the problem, the main character, and the setting here? Buck did not read the newspapers, or he would have known that trouble was brewing, not alone for himself, but for every Tidewater dog, strong of muscle and with warm, long hair from Puget Sound to San Diego. What can we learn about the problem, the main character, and the setting? Push pause here and answer that question. Awesome. Okay, so you've answered that question and you've cited evidence. If you haven't, go back and fix that. Let's look at the next sentence. It says, because men groping in the Arctic darkness had found yellow metal. So there's trouble brewing because some men in the Arctic found yellow metal. What do you think this yellow metal is that would cause all this trouble? What do you think? I know what it is, but I'm not going to tell you. Okay, let's look at number 2. Number 2, what do you learn about Buck in paragraphs 3 to 5? Cite evidence from the text to support your answer. So do that. Go back and review paragraphs 3, 4, and 5. You'll push pause here. 3, 4, and 5, and then you will cite evidence as you answer that question. And as you answer it, I want you to think about, who is Buck? I mean, what is his character like? How does he act? What's his status? What's he like as an individual? What's his attitude? What is all that? So answer that using evidence, and then you will advance to the next slide when you are done writing. Okay, so we're going to read in the book now. We're going to continue with paragraphs 7 through 22. That's actually pages 4, 5, and half of 6. 4, 5, half, and half of 6. And on page 6, where we're going to stop is with the line, Buck's throat was twisted into a savage growl. I wonder what that's about. We'll find out soon enough. Okay, so if you're going to read on your own, you will pause the video and read 4, 5, and the half of 6. You can pause now. All right, now if you're continuing with me to read, make sure you follow along in the book. We're on the top of page 4. The judge was at a meeting of the Raisin Growers Association, and the boys were busy organizing an athletic club on the memorable night of Manuel's treachery. No one saw him and Buck go off through the orchard on what Buck imagined was merely a stroll. And with the exception of a solitary man, no one saw them arrive at the little flag station known as College Park. This man talked with Manuel, and money chinked between them. "You might wrap up the goods before you deliver 'em," the stranger said gruffly. And Manuel doubled a piece of stout rope around Buck's neck under the collar. "Twist it and you'll choke 'em, plenty," said Manuel. And the stranger grunted a ready affirmative. Buck had accepted the rope with quiet dignity. To be sure, it was an unwanted performance, but he had learned to trust in men he knew, and to give them credit for a wisdom that outreached his own. But when the ends of the rope were placed in the stranger's hands, he growled menacingly. He had merely intimated his displeasure, in his pride believing that to intimate was to command. But to his surprise, the rope tightened around his neck, shutting off his breath. In quick rage, he sprang at the man, who met him halfway, grappled him close by the throat, and with a deft twist threw him over on his back. Then the rope tightened mercilessly, while Buck struggled in a fury, his tongue lolling out of his mouth and his great chest panting futilely. Never in all his life had he been so vilely treated, and never in all his life had he been so angry. But his strength ebbed, his eyes glazed, and he knew nothing when the train was flagged and the two men threw him into the baggage car. The next he knew, he was dimly aware that his tongue was hurting and that he was being jolted along in some kind of conveyance. The hoarse shriek of a locomotive whistling a crossing told him where he was. He had traveled too often with the judge not to know the sensation of riding in a baggage car. He opened his eyes, and into them came the unbridled anger of a kidnapped king. The man sprang for his throat, but Buck was too quick for him. His jaws closed on the hand, nor did they relax till his senses were choked out of him once more. "Yup, has fits," the man said, hiding his mangled hand from the baggage men, who had been attracted by the sound of a struggle. "I'm taking him up for the boss to Frisco. A crack dog doctor there thinks that he can cure him." Concerning that night's ride, the man spoke most eloquently for himself in a little shed back off a saloon on the San Francisco waterfront. "All I get is $50 for it," he grumbled, "and I wouldn't do it over for $1,000 cold cash." His hand was wrapped in a bloody handkerchief, and the right trouser leg was ripped from knee to ankle. "How much did the other mug get?" the saloon keeper demanded. "100, was the reply. "Wouldn't take a sou less, so help me." "That makes 150, the saloon keeper calculated. "And he's worth it, or I'm square-headed." The kidnapper undid the bloody wrappings and looked at the lacerated hand. "If I don't get the hydrophobia—" "It'll be because you were born to hang," laughed the saloon keeper. "Here, lend me the hand before you pull your freight," he added. Dazed, suffering intolerable pain from throat to tongue, with the life half throttled out of him, Buck attempted to face his tormentors. But he was thrown down and choked repeatedly, till they succeeded in filing the heavy brass collar from his neck. Then the rope was removed, and he was flung into a cage-like crate. There he lay for the remainder of the weary night, nursing his wrath and wounded pride. He could not understand what it all meant. What did they want with him, these strange men? Why were they keeping him pent up in this narrow crate? He did not know why, but he felt oppressed by the vague sense of impending calamity. Several times during the night he sprang to his feet when the shed door rattled open, expecting to see the judge, or the boys at least. But each time it was the bulging face of the saloon keeper that peered in at him by the sickly light of a tallow candle. Each time the joyful bark that trembled in Buck's throat was twisted into a savage growl. Okay, we're going to stop there and move on to the next slide. All right, you should have just finished reading pages 4, 5, and half of 6. We are going to discuss the last paragraph we just read. It's paragraph 22. It's halfway down on page 6. And we'll read it and try to figure out what this phrase impending calamity means. And we have these words impending and calamity that we will put in our vocabulary chart in just a moment. But let's read the context before we do that. There he lay for the remainder of the weary night, nursing his wrath and wounded pride. He could not understand what it all meant. What did they want with him, these strange men? Why were they keeping him pent up in this narrow crate? He did not know why, but he felt oppressed by the vague sense of impending calamity. Okay, so what I'd like you to do now is take a moment and look up these words impending and calamity, and we're going to put them in our vocabulary chart. So in just a second, you're going to go back to, I think it'd be like page 2 right now, and you should have room there for the words impending and calamity on your vocabulary chart. Look them up online. If you have a sense of what they mean, write that down. What part of speech are they? That's written right here on the slide. Your definition, synonyms, word that means the same thing, and then drawing a picture or using them in a sentence. So go ahead and do that. Look up impending and calamity, and then we'll have a better sense of what this paragraph means. Okay, so we're going to go back to page 14 in our blue notebook. I'll give you a second to turn to page 14 in your blue notebook. We've answered questions 1 and 2. Let's answer question 3 now. It says, what words and phrases in paragraph 22 represent Buck in human-like ways? Cite evidence from the text to support your answers. So what I'd like you to do is look back at this paragraph. It's the paragraph that starts on page 6. It starts, there he lay for the remainder of the weary night. Reread that paragraph, and I want you to pretend for a second that you don't know Buck is a dog. Pretend for a second that he's a human. And what I want you to do is think about, what are the specific phrases or words in here that make us think this is a human? Okay, so looking back at it again, reread that, and what are some things that clue us into he's actually a human, that make us think he's actually a human? And then what you're going to do is answer that question right here, okay, in the highlighted area. Go ahead and do that, and advance the slide when you are done answering question 3. Okay, so we're going to visit a term that we've talked about before in the past, just very quickly, and it's the word anthropomorphism. Anthropomorphism. And this is similar to the word personification, but it's much more intense. Okay, so the word personification is where we talk about things that are not human as though they are human, like the wind screamed through the trees. Okay, that's personification. You're making the wind into a person. But when we anthropomorphize, it means we're actually taking something and turning it into a person. So this word anthropo, it means man. This is the ugliest writing. It's disgusting. I'm so sorry. And then morphism means to change. Okay, so wow, this is bad. I apologize. I know this is ugly. But change. All right, good. So man change. So what I'm doing is I'm taking a character, I'm changing it into a person. Okay, when I say the wind screamed, I'm not really changing the wind into a person. You're not supposed to picture a person screaming. But with Buck, we have this thing anthropomorphizing. I mean, this character is basically a human. Okay, so when we look at this example here, look at this text on the left. It says he was nursing his wrath and wounded pride. Nursing means very carefully taking care of something. So his anger, his pride, he was just taking care of them all night. Only a person would do that. A dog's not going to do that. And also here, when he feels oppressed by a vague sense, well, that's ugly too. He feels oppressed by a vague sense. It's like he has these deep feelings of he's predicting something bad will happen. He's predicting bad things will happen. That's very human. So this is an example of anthropomorphism. I just want you to take note of that. Okay, so we're coming to the last activity of this lesson. What you're going to do is you're going to write a paragraph on page 14. At the bottom here, you'll see the yellow highlight. Write a paragraph responding to the question in your split page notes. Okay, so you're going to explain how the encounter with Manuel and the subsequent events described in paragraph 11 change Buck. So Buck is handed over. He goes from a lifestyle where he's one way at the house, at the mansion, to living another way. How is he changed? Okay, I want you to answer that question. You can come up with one way he's changed, Cite some evidence for it. 2 is best. But look back through all the paragraphs we've read up to page 6.5. Answer that, and then you will be just about done. Excellent, you did it. Okay, so to make sure you're actually done, you have totally finished the split page notes. Great job. You finished all the split page notes on page 14, and you have entered 2 new vocabulary words into your vocabulary chart. That should conclude the lesson for today. You've analyzed Buck's character based on his reactions to the men he encountered in chapter 1.